Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us. This is a very important conversation. I'm Carrie Leeson, the CEO of Lifeline Narrm, which is one of Lifeline's newest crisis support centres nationally. I'd like to begin today by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet and pay my respects to their elders, past and present, and of course extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples joining us today. Just a quick housekeeping item before we get underway. If you've logged in the last few seconds, the recording of the session is live. So the session today is being recorded. If you have any questions, please pop them in the chat and we'll do our best to cover them as we go. I think as we approach the end of the year, many of you are feeling much probably like Al and I, our buckets are pretty full, and many workplaces across Australia are seeing the signs of fatigue and burnout, with the burnout rates climbing to 43% in 2025. So today is a timely opportunity to reflect on how we can better support wellbeing, strengthen workplace culture for the year ahead, and of course, care for ourselves. Of course, at Lifeline, we do see firsthand how workplace pressures, especially in times of change, can take a real toll on mental health. Burnout, disengagement, emotional stress and strain aren't individual challenges, they're organisational ones, and they're rising. Today's discussion is about equipping leaders with practical tools and yourselves to support wellbeing, to foster trust, and of course, build psychologically safe environments. Because when people feel seen, heard, and valued, they thrive. And that's the ultimate goal. And so do the organisation that they're a part of. That's an important factor as well. So thank you, everyone, for submitting your questions to date. We've incorporated these into our Q&A, my discussion with our guests today. If you do have something you'd like to ask at the end, we are happy to stay on. Just submit your questions via the chat function below. Now, you'll notice a gentleman on the screen with me. I am delighted to be joined by none other than Allan Sparkes. Allan is a dear friend, but he is one of Australia's most highly decorated citizens and a nationally respected educator, an advocate for mental health, leadership and frontline wellbeing. Former New South Wales police officer, awarded the Cross of Valour. Allan has since served as Deputy Commissioner of the New South Wales Mental Health Commission and as Ambassador for organisations including Beyond Blue, Suicide Prevention Australia. Drawing on his deep and substantial lived experience and his distinguished career, he's a sought-after speaker on psychological safety, resilience and culture change. So Allan, your leadership, your lived experience is a powerful lens to bring to this conversation. Thank you so much for joining us today. Welcome, Allan.
Oh, thanks, Carrie, and it's great to see you. And unfortunately, I can't see everybody here, but a very good morning to everyone, and thank you very much for taking the time to join us today.
Yeah. So today's webinar is about beating burnout, and I think many of you might be thinking, well, what is burnout? And that's something that Al will discuss, and I will discuss through the short time that we have today. But burnout essentially is defined, and it is defined as a work-related psychological injury. It occurs when chronic unmanaged stress overwhelms a person's emotional, mental, and physical capacity. So that bucket being full analogy, it's certainly not about weakness or lack of resilience. Burnout happens when people are placed in environments where the demands consistently exceed the resources available to meet them. So it's linked to many, many things, and there is a list a mile long of things that are factors of burnout. But I'd like to put to you, Al, is this the issue, or is it the impact that it has on our minds and bodies that is actually the critical thing to focus on here?
I think that's a really valid point, Carrie. And as you said, there's a list of it a mile long of what people say is psychological risk or factors that contribute to burnout. But I believe what we're failing to do is educate people on how those risks and how those stresses actually impact our brains and bodies. Now, we're all told that we need to do certain things to remain physically and psychologically well, but it's never explained to us, why do we need to do that? How does our brain function? How does our body function in relation to combating and or managing the stresses that we're exposed to? And we see today that life, both in the workplace and with respect in our private lives, we are exposed to so many stresses that we never used to be. And I think that those stresses are increasing, both professionally and personally. So I believe it's critically important that we educate people on the impact that they have on our brain, on our bodies, and how do we educate people? How do we help them understand so that they're better placed and self-empowered to understand what they need to do to purely manage the stresses that they're exposed to. And that's where it comes into this prevention, proactive space, which I think is actually causing a lot of people concern. That for years we've relied on the post-vention model. How do we help people after they're unwell? But now the legislation has meant we've got to shift the focus to a preventative model. And that with good reason, it may present some challenges for people. So the more that we can help people understand how to do the prevention model, the proactive model, potentially we will see a reduction in the severity of stresses upon people and reduce the rates of not only burnout, but mental ill health across the country.
It's going further up that stream. And so it's really about empowering or educating leaders to look out for what the early warning signs might be. Do you have any thoughts on that in terms of some of the, the earliest indicators aren't loud. There's subtle shifts in behaviors, things like energy reductions, or, it can be as emotional exhaustion or fatigue, cynicism, slight withdrawal. What is something that leaders should be looking out for?
I have a great saying that I believe leaders should be the living, breathing example of how they want their people to be in the first place. But it takes effort, and it takes just genuine care. Unless you really care about your people, I don't see how you're going to pick up the little nuances that maybe the subtle changes in behaviour that could very well be the early signs. And I respect that everyone's an individual and they may display individual characteristics, but unless you genuinely care about your people, how are you going to pick it up? And I'm a great believer that the earlier you detect changes, then you've got a greater chance of nipping it in the bud and getting things back to where they need to be. You and I are very familiar with the mental health continuum, Carrie, which we saw exhibited in Canada when we were there working together. And I think the mental health continuum is a great little tool for people to use that just note those little changes in behaviour that relate to a severity of stress or impact. But it gets back to leadership management genuinely caring about their people, and the people feel as though that they are genuinely cared for. When you develop that bridge where you've got a great connection between leadership management and your staff, that's when you can start to make changes where people feel as though, A, they care about me, or B, there's something happening in my life and I can trust them to go to them to explain why I am feeling or behaving in this way. And that bridge of trust is something that takes a while to build and can be destroyed very, very quickly. So it's a very, very important factor. But unless you have that environment where people feel as though someone is looking out for me, somebody knows that I'm working as best I can, I'm doing my best, and I can go to them and just say, I just need a bit of help here or there. That's very, very important.
And this is where you start to get into the sophistication. So yes, there's the legal element of psychosocial safety in the workplace, and that's very technical. What you're talking about there is actually cultural and more social. It's about really having people in roles who are compatible with leadership today, and that is about caring, really caring for your staff. It's also about caring for yourself, though, isn't it, Al? I think in terms of leaders are sometimes themselves struggling to protect their own well-being in workplaces. So
they are, Carrie, and they carry enormous responsibilities, not to do their own duties, but when they're in a managerial role, responsible for other staff, I mean, that just multiplies the stresses that their organisation is faced with, their team's faced with. They've got to take all that on board, and then they've got to have the time, space, and energy to care for their people. And we're all humans. We only have so much capacity. So that's why I'm a great believer in collaboration, that we work together as much as we can. But I still believe that you need to be that living, breathing example of how you want your people to be. And if you're not, then how can people say, well, they are really not only saying what we need to do, they're doing what we need to do. And I think leadership is all about leading by example and showing that you care about yourself and your people.
Yeah. What are some of the things you do?
I
know there's a lot of people thinking, what does that look like for Allan and Carrie, two people in the mental health space? So start with yourself.
Look, as you know, Carrie, I do a lot of work in the first response sector, and I'm not as young as I used to be, but I still like to set the right example. So I train as much as I can, both out in the open and at the gymnasium. I still play full contact rugby union. I drink very, very minimal amounts of alcohol. I have now become so anal about my sleep quality, and I measure my sleep quality. I measure my heart rate variability, and I eat well. I know how to manage my stresses. I know where my mental health continuum is. I know what my foundations of good physical and psychological health are, but I want to be that right example to the people that I'm conducting my training with, that they go, you know what, Al, actually, he lives it, he breathes it. He's been to the worst end of mental ill health you can possibly imagine. He knows what that's like, and I know why Al works really, really hard to stay well, but to be that good example. But I think the most important thing, Carrie, I know why I need to do those things now. I have been educated by great psychiatrists, psychologists. I do a lot of research for me personally, but I understand the why factor. I understand why I became burned out. I understand why I developed workplace mental illnesses, and I've worked out how the best way to recover from them. The best way is prevent it happening in the first place.
Yeah, that's utopia, isn't it? And for anyone who's fortunately in that situation, that's definitely where you want to be starting to take the steps. But again, we touched on burnout being a multitude of potential factors. You distilled it down to two key behavioral elements, one being sleep. And the other one you mentioned, which you haven't mentioned yet, but you've said it to me and it really resonates, is hypervigilance. So when you're looking at your team and when you're looking at individuals, that was certainly something that resonated with me, and something you mentioned. You could be looking at for a multitude of behaviors, but there were two that stood out, those being that sleep and hypervigilance. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, I mean, the reason we need to sleep, and we could spend all day talking about that. So everybody who's part of the group today, I urge you to just research, why do we need to sleep? There's a professor who has written a book. I just forget his name for the moment, but he's written a book and has a great TEDx talk on why do we need to sleep. And I really urge you to look that up. Matthew Walker is his name, Professor Walker, and explains that we need a certain amount of sleep each per night, or at the end of each shift, for the sleep cycles that we need to be engaged and processed. And that allows us to manage the things that we've been exposed to today, manage and regulate our emotions, our feelings, rebuild the body, restore the body. And if we don't get the hours that we need, it reduces our ability to manage the stresses that we're exposed to. And because our body is designed and our brain's designed to help us survive in this crazy world, it has a warning system called our fight or flight response. And we see that today, so many people, their fight or flight response is continually being activated. And unless you restock the stress hormones and chemicals that are needed for your fight or flight response to be processed naturally and the stress cycle to be complete, it again reduces our ability to manage the stresses that we're exposed to, which means at the end of the day, we're less likely to get the sleep that we need, which again reduces our ability to have a fully responsive fight or flight response. And the circle just goes on, and our mental and physical health starts to deteriorate. And unless we intercept that and stop it and reverse it, it will continue. And that's what we see are the key elements of being burnt out. They're the two big ones, plus others, of course. So we need to educate people, why do we need to sleep? So that they can get the amount of sleep that they need. And if they're not getting it, they need to seek professional help to understand why they're not getting it, and to improve their sleep for their required amount they get it. And also, how do we help people combat this fight or flight response problem? And it's actually quite relatively easy, that we can give people the skills to do that. And that's the things that we train on, giving people these skills. And we know it makes a huge difference.
Yeah, absolutely. What are a couple of those skills?
Firstly, diaphragmatic breathing. It's just the most amazing, quickest, cheapest, bang for buck, best way to shut off the stress cycle or the stressor that's impacting you. Just breathing diaphragmatically. And again, I urge everyone who's here today, just research diaphragmatic breathing. And it's just simply changing the way you breathe. And again, there's so much material available on the web to help you learn how to do it. Literally, it takes a matter of seconds. But the impact it has is just absolutely amazing. And we see today, on people watching rugby league, they score a try, they get around in a circle, and they start to breathe deeply through their nose, and they're simply breathing diaphragmatically. They're shutting off that stress cycle and reopening that prefrontal cortex. It's absolutely brilliant. But most people just don't know how to do it. But yeah, in 5 seconds, we can change that.
Yeah, yeah. I appreciate we are sort of covering off on so many concepts, and this is where, we'll discuss where you can find out more information. Al will be speaking at our summit next year, so we urge you to certainly look at that program, because Al is an absolute font of knowledge. The other thing you were talking about earlier in terms of sleep, hypervigilance, how that plays out in the workplace is it's so difficult, and I'd imagine one of the biggest issues I deal with in my speaking and my engagement is with individuals and employees, where their responsibility for their health and happiness ends and the workplace's responsibility for their health and happiness begins. So quite often, it used to be back in the day, you would turn up to work, put your problems aside, get on with your day, pick up that stress backpack on the way home. And now we really are encouraging, and we can't avoid it, but we are encouraging people to bring their whole selves to work. But that brings, again, a complexity that workplaces technically aren't necessarily across. So it really is, again, on that sophistication, training, education of the leadership to ensure that they are comfortable and ready to have tough conversations when they need to have them, and that they are well versed in workplace design. Often say you cannot yoga class your way out of poor design. If you need to look at your systems and your structures, that's something that you absolutely do need to do. But then for the individuals, and what you're talking about, Allan, is just really about instilling a culture where it's okay to stop and do some diaphragmatic breathing, or to use some of the other cognitive behavioral therapy skills that people can deploy. The breathing in particular is really useful. We use it a lot at Lifeline, and that's because, and when we trained together in Canada, they said you cannot be stressed and relaxed at the same time. So breathing absolutely just calms in the immediate moment your central nervous system. So what are some of the other things that we can, before we look on, the future, before we look to the future, are there any skills that you think are really good to advise people of now, those sitting on the call today who might be struggling a little bit with their stress levels or cortisol?
I think that it's always very, very important to try and identify what is it that's causing you psychological distress, and how are you going to overcome that? Carrie, I don't want to go down the path of a lot of the work that Lifeline does, but what we do know, that unless we help people overcome the why factor, it becomes even more challenging. So I think it's very important for people to self-identify what is it that's really, really causing me psychological distress, and can I overcome those things myself, or whom am I able to engage with to help me overcome them? Because unless, it's like anything, unless you overcome it and either remove it or reduce it, it's going to continue to cause you problems. So I think we're very good at sometimes avoiding the things that are causing us problems. But if there's a way and means of overcoming it, then I think just that sheer fact you've achieved that means the next one that's in line, because most of the time there's more than just one, it helps you develop a pattern of being able to overcome these challenges. And for many people they're in such a state of psychological distress, everything seems so overwhelming, impossible to overcome. That's a really, really sad and unfortunate and terrifying place to be. And that's where we do need the clinical intervention, the support, the professional support after. But this is why, for workplaces, we need to identify those psychological risks together and try and overcome them as best we possibly can to reduce their impact on people.
Mm. Because I think, everyone here today would acknowledge that you are certainly at the coalface in many ways with the rising rates of workplace burnout. The data is there. But of course, I'm sure many people sitting on the call are relating or one degree of separation away, if not themselves, trying to overcome the beginning or the middle or the crises that is burnout when it occurs. So there's cultural warning signs that contribute. There's tensions in the workplace. And I think we really do need to accept, as you say, that unless we take steps to get further upstream, to move into prevention, we really are going to be harming people through the process of going about their day-to-day lives. And really, it's not about not harming people, it's about allowing people to thrive. I think that's where we ultimately want, and it's something Allan and I are so passionate about, is living your best life. The work you do is often half your waking life, and quite often compatibility with your hours, compatibility with your colleagues, compatibility with the nature of the work, the content, can all be risk factors. But I guess what we wanted to touch on today was really the fact that there is a lot of hope. There's a lot of focus, there's a lot of information and evidence around how to prevent burnout from occurring. If you are suffering from burnout, on that mental health continuum, these are all concepts that we'll be discussing in great detail in March at our summit. But March might feel like a long way away for some people, Al, who are sitting with us today, who absolutely will benefit from being there. But in terms of talking about something to take away today, some key takeaways, what are some practical steps for leaders or individuals, do you think, to align with in terms of their general well-being and preventing burnout?
First of all, I'm a great believer that you need to have people prepared to set a goal, and that goal is to make a workplace where people want to be, not feel as though they have to be. And it's proven that positive social connection is one of the best treatments for a lot of our mental ill health issues. And if you can create a workplace where people just want to come to work, they want to stay at work, they love being there, that's a goal which I believe is achievable, but it takes everybody's input. And that gets back to my second point I would suggest is collaboration. We have to have collaboration with leaders, managers, staff, organisation, that everybody is on the same path to say, this is where we want to go to. But how are we going to achieve it? But we collaborate with ideas and input, and people feel as though that they can say what they need to say without fear of punishment or some form of other penalty. People have to have that open voice opportunity. And I think the third one, Carrie, is critically important, is education. We have to educate everybody from our youngest in coming into the workplace, even before that. We have to educate them on why they need to do certain things, not just tell people that they have to do it. Whatever it is that's going to enhance their ability to do their work, live their best life, we have to educate them on how they can do that, not just why they need to do it.
Yeah, I love that. So it is about things that you can do today, but then it is about committing to a long-term goal. This is, I think, and for anyone sitting in large organizations, the beautiful thing about what we're discussing today is that there are roadmaps already in place. There are organizations who are well on the path to taking the steps. Allan works alongside many of them, and so do I, who will be willing and able to discuss what they're doing and how they're doing it in easy to achieve ways. So there's obviously the stuff that we can do for ourselves, which you've touched on with the diaphragmatic breathing, but then there's also the stuff that we can do as an organization, which is really to set a long-term goal to achieve that culture and to achieve that environment so that people can live their best lives whilst they're at work, I think that drives true collaboration as well, which I think is a great community outcome. We're so dispersed and disconnected when it comes to post-COVID living. I know at Lifeline, one of the top 5 reasons people do reach out is loneliness.
Yep.
People are feeling isolated. So you match that isolation with a lack of sleep, with stress at work, with feeling as though you have a lot of responsibility and no control over the outcomes. These are all very, very strong themes that we see coming through. And if you are feeling those today, I think it's really about understanding there are people like Allan, Lifeline, doing the work to ensure that we can give you some very meaningful and hopeful steps to start making technical changes and social changes in your workplace. What I did want to do, because we've framed today's discussion over the 50 or 60 questions that came through. So thank you for submitting those prior. But there's one on there that I'd like you to chat about, and it's just simply, can you engage diaphragmatic breathing by going outside for a walk? So that one wasn't on our list there, but someone's asked that once they've heard you talk about it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, thankfully we breathe and we like to keep breathing. So simply by simply breathing through your nose, you are starting to engage the diaphragmatic breathing process. And breathing through the nose means we get oxygen to our brains much faster. We create nitric oxide, which is a gas which enlarges our blood vessels. But breathing through the nose, and you're hoping just to find your stomach moving outwards. There's a change in your stomach structure, which actually just means your diaphragm is moving up and down. So a big deep breath through your nose, and even 2 big deep breaths through your nose, will make an impact. And we have capabilities through software to measure heart rate variability things. And we can see it live. It works brilliantly. But you can breathe diaphragmatically anywhere you are awake and conscious. No matter what you're doing, you can breathe diaphragmatically. And I'm doing it now. It's just that you can't see me doing it. But if you feel your tummy moving outwards, it's a really good indicator that your diaphragm is moving up and down. It's also, I use it when I'm training, when I'm physically training, I get more oxygen, I can perform better. And it is about just changing just the way we simply breathe. There's different techniques we use to help us sleep. We use it for instantaneous relief, for long-term benefit. Diaphragmatic breathing changes your coherence ratio, which is your rate of stress. So the more you do it, the better you become at it. It's a skill, and you practice it, and use it in particular circumstances. But yeah, look, it is absolutely brilliant. I kid you not.
Thank you, Al. Yeah, before, I'm just conscious of everyone's time, and you've spent the last half hour with us, and we're very grateful for that. Allan, do you have any remarks you want to make before I wrap it up? Is there anything that I haven't touched on that you think is absolutely a nugget that people need to hear?
Look, it's change takes time, and we can't expect our workplaces to be suddenly absolutely brilliant. That takes time, but I can assure you the effort is so worth it. For your own health, to change your health physically and psychologically, it may take time, but it is so worth it. Please put the effort in. Please keep doing your best, and bring other people on board with you to make those cultural changes we need, not only in our workplaces, but in society generally. Let's be proactive.
Yes, agreed. And applaud everyone who's sitting with us at the moment, because they're definitely on board, Al. We've got a few colleagues on this journey of ours, and we're all looking to build that workplace that is healthier, that is more connected, that is more resilient going into the future. So thank you to everyone again. If you found this webinar helpful, we're also hosting the summit, which I referred to, on psychosocial safety. It's the first summit of its kind. It is an absolute game changer. We've got Dr. Amy Cuddy, Kristen Holgate, the Chief Executive of Team Global Express and former CEO of Australia Post. We've got David Hazelhurst, the CEO of Services Australia. Of course, Allan Sparkes, Yelena Jokic, Jonathan Moran. It really is a coming together of people who are really at the forefront of what is developing into a mental health, ill health crisis. So if you want to certainly find out more, we will email out the link following today. but you will gain not just insights, which is what you've heard today, and concepts, but you will absolutely leave with actionable items and practical tools and clarity. So we do want you to be able to create that healthier, safer, more resilient you and team. But certainly for more information, the website is interedgesummit.com.au, but we will make sure that we circulate that to everyone today. So thank you to those of you who've given us the half hour. We will try and get back to as many of you as we can with the Q&As, but we hope to see you in March of next year as well. Thanks, Allan. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Carrie. Thank you everyone for being here.